I'm Alyssa Vine. I'm the University Director of Credit for Prior Learning, and we are very excited to be working toward expanding portfolio at CUNY this year. And our approach to doing this right now, for those who weren't at our previous meeting in October, our intention here is really to bring together faculty and staff from across the university to help us really think more concretely about ways of approaching portfolio assessment and identify the needs of our campuses, and to develop support and infrastructure that will allow more campuses to make portfolio available to students. And we know that this is a really impactful way of recognizing different kinds of learning and experience for students, but it also is pretty high demand both for students and for institutions. So figuring out how we can best support campuses in this work is a really important next phase of our CPL work. We're going to be covering all of these different topics over the course of various sessions of this working group throughout the year. Today's focus is really going to be on how do we support students in their process of developing portfolios. And we just situated there. Okay. So the kinds of questions that we're really going to be talking about today will have to do with the type of instruction that students need in order to be successful with portfolio. What do they need to understand about the expectations and requirements of the portfolio, and how do they actually go about connecting their knowledge to course learning outcomes, and how do they actually execute the technical assembly of the portfolio, including the writing and bringing together different pieces of evidence. We also want to think about what level of engagement is required of academic departments in order to make this work, both to establish opportunities for students to pursue portfolios, ways of supporting individual students, and also the evaluation work that goes into this process. We also want to think about the aspects of student guidance that can be general versus discipline specific. So to what extent can we create models that allow us to help many students across many different departments versus what really needs that explicit guidance of a content expert for what the student is pursuing. I'm also including on this slide some excerpts from our CUNY policy and how it references portfolio, just to serve as a note that another main intention of this group is to really keep going back to this policy and figure out what we can do to make sure that campuses have what they need to deliver upon what's expected of them in terms of the policy. So for those of you who attended our previous, sorry, I might have skipped a slide there. For those of you who attended our previous working group session, we heard from a few different colleges that have existing models for portfolio in order to understand different approaches that are out there at CUNY. And we know there's other models that exist out there nationally as well. One option that we know of that has been around for a long time at CUNY is the model where a college offers a credit-bearing course that guides students through the development of their portfolio. The student earns the credit for that course as long as they successfully complete the course, whether or not they submit their portfolio and whether or not that portfolio is approved for credit. Some of the characteristics of this model, in many cases, this approach is based on the Kolb model of experiential learning. These courses are taught by faculty or qualified staff. It requires sort of a surrounding infrastructure of administrative support from the college that guides the student from the point of interest to the point of submitting their portfolio with support all along the way. And that's a really high touch model. And we know that, that in a lot of ways that feels out of reach for many colleges. we know that these models are really guided by local policy in terms of the courses that students can petition for with portfolio and what the structure of different credit awards and what limitations of how many credits can be awarded. All of that is really based specifically on the way that the individual college approaches it. We know that there are important considerations that come along with this model in terms of, you're hiring an instructor to run this course, the number of students that you need to actually to do that on a semester by semester basis can be, I know, also something that feels out of reach for some colleges, especially just getting started. I think there's also advising considerations. It's important to make sure that that students are aware of how the credits that they're pursuing will fit into their degree program. We've also heard about concerns, especially among community colleges, about whether there's room for those credits from the course itself to fit into degree programs. There's also the need to make sure that students really are aware and understand whether or not excuse me, whether or not there's like a more straightforward CPL mechanism that could work for them. So, if they have a training or certification, or they could take a standardized exam that may be less labor intensive for them and quicker for them to get the credit. So having that advising piece incorporated needs to be a part of a credit bearing course model like that as well. Another approach that we're seeing more of across CUNY, we heard in our last session from York and BMCC, and I know there are other colleges out there that are doing this as well at a department level. Academic departments are deciding which course or courses could be a fit for portfolio. The departments themselves are developing the criteria and the rubrics, how students are eligible, the type of materials that students receive to support their process, and the extent to which students are supported throughout the process. This model definitely requires significant investment of time and work by the department. And this also puts a pretty significant onus on the student to be prepared and equipped for for the process to tackle this independently. And I think that for some students, this is a workable model where they're told what they need to do and they can go out and do it and come back with what faculty will see as qualifying for credit. But for other CUNY students, that is not really setting them up for success. So I think that there's some limitations to access in that way that are important to keep in mind. And so I think one of the things that I think we're hoping to really focus on in today's conversation is whether there is another option that we could potentially implement at CUNY that would help sort of address the gap that exists between these two options. I think among the colleges that offer the first option of that credit-bearing course, we know that those colleges have longstanding processes and deep expertise and infrastructure that they've created over time that makes that work. And we're seeing the second option at the department level as more common for new adopters. But we're thinking about whether there's a hybrid of these possibilities. And what we're thinking about is whether once the department says these courses are eligible and this is who it's targeted for, and we're prepared to evaluate portfolios, and then from there to the point of the portfolio being submitted, is there like a course model that we could implement centrally? I think we'd call it a workshop rather than a course, a non-credit, asynchronous workshop model that would give students some basic guidance and framework for them to use to approach the portfolio development process. So in this sort of hypothetical, but I think we're really excited about this possibility. CUNY Central would facilitate the workshop via Brightspace. Our academic departments at the college level would really set the parameters as far as what courses are eligible, what students would need to be eligible for that, the criteria of the portfolio, what they're really looking for, and what's required for a portfolio to be successful. Academic departments would also develop the rubric and determine the process by which those portfolios would be evaluated. And CUNY Central would have to work closely with colleges and academic departments to make sure that we have set up the right infrastructure and processes for how students actually gain access to the workshop. And there would probably need to be some sort of shared advising model to make sure that the students have some of the human touch that might be really important to this, and what the balance of that human touch would be between us at the central office and the content experts and those in a position of really understanding the student's own degree program and what the requirements are there. And then again, at the end of the workshop, the submission process for the completed portfolio would need to be something that's really developed in partnership with the college and the central office as well. And of course, the evaluation of the portfolio and the determination of whether credit awarded really comes back to faculty in the same way that that all aspects of CPL depend on faculty expertise and determination. So how would this actually work? So I've put together just this list of steps, and I would say that the steps that I've listed in blue, I see this, I think, as sort of the upfront work that it would take to establish an opportunity. And the green is more the process as it applies to individual students. So that's what, you know, any given cohort or individual student would go through. But the blue is part of the setup work. And I fully acknowledge that this is not at all a fully baked idea. There's a lot of steps that I think we can all imagine that are missing from this list. I think we know that there would need to be really clear information about what's required of colleges to participate. We would have to set up collaborative processes to make sure that you know, there's sort of a seamless experience for the student to actually gain access to the course, and then also on the other end, how portfolio credits are transcripted. All of that is, I think, you know, very much up for discussion and input. But just to give a sense of sort of what the model could potentially look like, I've outlined these steps. I think it's also important to mention that there could be some combination of credit bearing and centralized that colleges could also consider. Where we would intend to build a workshop that's modular, so campuses would actually be able to potentially scaffold onto that to create additional modules or requirements to turn it into a credit bearing course if that is or eventually becomes what the college wants to do. And similarly, if the workshop content seems like something that you would like more students to have access to, it could potentially be integrated into other kinds of credit-bearing courses, piecemeal. So I think there's a lot of different options. If we develop something along these lines, I think we would be very open and interested to see what campuses would want to do with the content. I'm going to pause for a minute. I have more to walk through, but I want to just check in and see if anybody has any questions or thoughts on what I've shared this far. Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, I had a few reactions. I mean, I really like the idea of having a centralized workshop that students could take. That would help us out really a lot. The idea of asking every academic department to give us a list of courses or maybe a list of courses that are not eligible, I would hope that you would work centrally with us to do that. Because we can handle that process a little better. We also have a sense of what kinds of prior learning credit students are coming in looking for. You know, since John Jay is a very mission-driven school, we have students that come in for a lot of things that we don't actually teach here. You know, sort of they want to get credit because they were small business owners or they are a dance instructor or they, you know, these types of things. So, you know, I want to be open to being able to send students to the workshop for those types of things. But, you know, there would definitely have to be sort of parameters and input probably with each individual student. So I'm just putting that out there.
Okay, those are really good points. I think on the first point, I would just respond to that to say I think our intention would be that if if a college is interested, the college could indicate that they're interested, and if there was one department that wanted to identify a course and say, yes, like we've been thinking we'd like to do this. This is the course we have in mind, or these are the courses that we think are could be a good match. Then that's it. I think we would think of this less as if a college opts in, they need to ask every department to participate. It would be more creating the avenue for the departments that are interested and where it makes sense. I think if a college wanted to call upon all departments to think about this, that could be definitely. Go ahead, Kathy.
What I was going to say, so then it's like flip the other way because don't you need to know what the students are wanting? Not what the department, it's like we're not going to recruit students to come and take a prior learning class for a specific class.
So I think you could do that. You could recruit students to take a particular class. I know that there are some examples of that some departments are working toward right now. So that's one approach. But you're right. There's lots of students who may come in looking for portfolio, and I think that it would be interesting to think about what that version could look like. I think we are very open to that possibility. I think that if you said, and I'm being totally hypothetical here, but if you said at John Jay, if a student comes in with, like, it could potentially be credit that fulfills gen ed requirement. Like, there are different ways that you could think about where those credits could go. Or I know, like at Lehman, they award like departmental elective credit. There's a lot of students who are more interested in getting credit. They want to take the courses at Lehman, but they also want to get credit for their experience, like you're describing. So I think that we don't have to. The way I'm describing it is I think based on what we've seen, which is that individual academic departments are interested in doing it and they could use a way to support students. But I think that there could be a different application of the same workshop that's sort of a more general, and it would be up to the college to think about like what the potential for credit and where the appropriate evaluation would come from if it's from a discipline that the college doesn't offer. Does that make sense as sort of a way of thinking about that distinction?
Melissa, I just want to add, just from my perspective, because
Mhm.
I feel like in order for something like this to work, the infrastructures have to be aligned across somehow, because what we find in working with students in portfolio, they need a lot of support and guidance through this, even though that this is helpful for them. We still have to work with to navigate that with the academic departments. And for us, we're not asking for courses up front. What happens, a student comes in with a certain experience, we approach the department, they tell us, okay, with this student, let's see what we can do. And then they decide based on
Mhm. Mhm.
what is the students particularly bringing in, because every student's nuanced. Students are coming with various things. So I feel like this has to be customizable to departments because depending on the discipline, it may be more skills based versus a straight
Mhm.
course, right? So I think in doing something like that, we have to look at like what it currently exists in each campus in terms of infrastructure support, all of this, meaning
Mhm.
faculty and the student through
Mhm.
that process before to kind of adopt something like this. Because we're
Mhm.
seeing a lot of variation. And I think what's nice is that we can say like, here's is what is needed, that is part of the process, and then customize depending on the discipline and course and leave it
Mhm.
open for faculty to have that freedom to say like, we want to elect to do a portfolio for this because it makes the most sense based on what the students bringing in is in terms of their experience.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So yes, I hear what you're saying. So you want to make sure that if there were to be a sort of central student support mechanism, that it would be flexible enough that departments could approach it the way that makes sense for an individual student request.
Correct. And then the other thing too is like we don't know what commitments faculty have aside from that, if they're going to have space to do this. And that's another thing with the compensation issues that's always come up. So I'm just saying it
Mhm.
just because, we've been lucky to portion to have like funding or any kind of support, but that could be something else that we would have to consider as
Mhm.
well. And
Mhm.
looking at this as something in addition to what their workload is and, depending on the
Mhm.
faculty,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Any other comments or thoughts? Go ahead, Veronica.
I was also wondering about, and this kind of stays in my mind because at Kale, it was mentioned that, we only have one chance. Somebody comes in one time and whether they call or they go online, and if they don't find it or they don't feel it's going to work, then that's it. And they go on to some other place. But I'm wondering this idea of maybe CUNY wide, because there could be instances where if somebody applied to a central process, they could be directed to Brooklyn College or to Lehman, depending on their circumstance.
Hmm.
Do you feel like that kind of central intake mechanism would really work well, and then that person could be?
I think that for our, I'll answer this in two different ways. I think that for CPL overall, I do think that we need to come up with some way of capturing more information about students who find their way to CUNY Central with questions about credit for prior learning and helping link those students with CUNY Reconnect or NISOP and make sure that students sort of find their way to the right college for their interests and their needs and their potential for CPL. So I do think that that centralized routing is something that we want to develop more robustly for sure. I do think a lot of students, are at their college and then it comes up that they're interested for CPL. But I do acknowledge that there's like a universe of prospective students out there that we should be better equipped to sort of help find their way. And I think that is happening. And for CPL, I think we need to integrate CPL and CPL advising into more of that conversation. I think when it comes to portfolio and the idea of a centralized student support workshop, I see it as being more of like a streamlined possibility where I think that it would be a little bit like there would be some parameters around. I don't think that any student would be coming through the portfolio workshop without their college being aware, involved, and having approved that this is the right path for them. So whether that means that they're consulting with their academic department for approval to pursue portfolio for a particular course that's been pre-identified by the college, or if it's more like a student who's talking to somebody in Marsha's case, like in the CPL office, or an academic advisor and saying, I have all of this experience. This isn't what I want to study, but I do think that there's a place that I want to know that there's credit for all of this learning that I have, for a way for that student to also find their way into a process of creating a portfolio where they have some infrastructure and guidance. So I think it would be less of this particular model would be less of an intake spot. But it's an interesting consideration, I think. And yeah, so thank you for raising that. I'm going to keep moving, although I will just check and see any other questions before I continue. Okay. All right. So over the last couple of years, I've been working with Jessica Kindred, who is an adjunct faculty member at a couple different CUNY colleges, who has a deep background in portfolio assessment. And we've also gotten a lot of input from our colleagues at CUNY SPS and Lehman, where they have existing courses. And we've come up with an outline of what the modules of a portfolio workshop could potentially look like. I'm going to walk through them pretty quickly, and I am going to acknowledge that there's a lot of words on the screen, and you don't have to digest all of it now. Everything here will be made available afterward, but I'm just going to give at a high level what we would sort of aim to incorporate. And this is also something that I think we would really seek expertise and input from campuses, especially those who have guided students through this process, to make sure that we're accounting for, your experience and insights. So in a first module, we would be making sure that students come away with an understanding of the portfolio process and the elements of the workshop itself. They would be guided through setting up the types of templates or other infrastructure for actually putting together their materials to organize their content. We would have some type of checkpoint within the module to make sure that they actually have completed these steps within the module and are prepared to actually start the work of creating a portfolio. In the second module, they'd be guided through the review of the course that the syllabus of the course that they're targeting and any expectations that the department has set for what they're looking for in the portfolio. And they would also be introduced to some technology tools that would help them start to document their own learning. This would hopefully help them create an outline, and the checkpoint in this module would be with our office as a chance to review a preliminary outline and answer any questions about the process and accessing different tools and making sure that they sort of have a human touch at that point in the workshop. In the third module, students would learn about experiential learning theory, not in a super in-depth way in the way that I think you would in a credit-bearing course, but as tools for them to use in incorporating the type of reflection and narrative that a portfolio is likely to require. This would include Kolb's cycle of experiential learning as a framework for aligning their individual learning with target course learning outcomes. They would emerge from this module with a comprehensive outline that's really a first draft. And at this point, I think that we would probably want to see the student have the opportunity to share that outline or draft with an academic advisor or the academic department itself to make sure that they're on track and to get feedback that would inform their work during the fourth module, where they'd really be working on building out the narrative content and annotated evidence. And in this point, the checkpoint may be meeting with a college writing center or otherwise having some input and support with approaching a final draft. And the fifth module would provide step-by-step guidance for polishing their portfolio and also directing them to college-specific processes and requirements for their submission process. And that would require that they really complete very clear steps and make sure that they really have, sort of dotted every I and T that's expected of them. This is, very admittedly a much less hands-on model than the courses that we know of elsewhere within the system. But we're thinking that this could be a way of ensuring that students have some support and infrastructure that may be hard for the college to provide otherwise. I'll pause again there to see if we have any reactions, thoughts, feedback on that as a general outline of the type of modules that we're envisioning in this workshop. If not, I'll wait one more second.
I have a quick question.
Okay,
Surprise.
yeah.
Good
Hey,
afternoon,
Christine.
everyone. So I noticed a couple of times in this meeting, we've referenced students doing a portfolio for something that they're not majoring in, and that kind of threw me off. I forgot who used the example that said like they're in one specific major, but they're coming to seek credits because they own the business. So that just threw me off a little bit, because when we're talking about CPL, I was under the assumption that it should be going toward their degree. So something like that off the top of my head would be somebody that's like a business major, right? Like that would make sense that they would do that portfolio if that was their major. But someone in a criminal justice, I don't see how that would work. So I just wanted to touch base on, especially the campuses with the limited resources, and what that would look like, right? Because we should be having students doing these portfolio, even being in these courses. And that's what I've found interesting listening to other schools, whether it's in CUNY and across just the country, is when they have this portfolio class, it's usually senior colleges, right? It makes it very difficult for community colleges to find that space to have it in there. But it's interesting in the fact that like a good portion of the students are not actually, they're taking it for the credits versus completing the portfolio. And they're very honest in stating this, you know, the whoever's speaking from the campuses. Again, not only CUNY, this is outside of CUNY that I've heard from different campuses. So I just wanted to just touch base on that regarding because for us, it needs to make sense. It needs to go toward their major, and this is definitely not an option in our school for you to swindle to get credits to make it there, and it doesn't align with the major. So I just wanted to get a little bit of clarity around that.
I would say that the intention of like what we're intending with a workshop like this would not be to push any college toward making portfolio opportunities available that don't make sense for their students or don't make sense for the way that their degree programs work. But rather, I think at the college level, it would need to be decided what type of portfolio opportunities do you want your students to have access to? And if the answer to that question is credits that are applicable to their major at LaGuardia, and anything that falls outside of that is not, it's for a variety of reasons, is not the direction that you would point students, then there's nothing from my perspective I would be happy to support any college in defining the parameters of what portfolio opportunities make sense for their students. So, you know, I think that some of the colleges where it's a course model, the credit bearing course model, and students can come in and say, you know, this is what I have experience in, and you know, this is the course that I want to get credit for, and you know, maybe it has nothing to do with what I'm majoring in now, but you know, it's the validation of that. Or it's going through to get the 3 credits for the portfolio, you know, all the different ways that students approach it. This workshop would not be to push any college to do that if that's not the college's preference, intention, or in the best interest of their students. Does that kind of address what you're getting at, Christine?
Yeah, I mean, I still have the question of how would somebody make that fit, even in a senior college, right? Like, she gave a very good example. Like, how are you going to award those credits for someone in criminal justice that owned, like, what class is that going to align with? It should ideally, CPL should go, we want it to be impactful and go toward the degree. So, yeah, so yes, thank you so much for answering that. Yeah, I guess we shall see. This is why we're having these meetings.
Yeah, well, and I think you know, we would learn from each other too. Sam,
Exactly.
if you want to go ahead.
I have two comments. One is about Christine's question, and that is that I do think though that we have to be aware that students do change their majors often, and that they might start out saying that it does apply to their major and then it doesn't, or vice versa, that you know, they might want to do a portfolio because they're about to change their major or thinking about changing their major. So I do want to say that we should perhaps build in a little bit of flexibility. At least I would advocate for building in more flexibility. Again, I don't want to just award credit for credit's sake. And I've actually advised students not to do CPL if it doesn't really apply to their major and they've already basically like finished their major. Like, there's no point in adding that extra, you know, just sort of, you know, strenuous credit. But, you know, I think, I mean, just to give you an example of Hostos and what we deal with a lot is that students, there's hundreds of students that want to get into our nursing program, but only, you know, a limited amount of them get in every year. And oftentimes those students have to decide to change their majors or kind of be in a holding pattern and hope that they get in, you know, the next semester, which is very unlikely. You know, those students, I think, would be prime candidates for potentially doing a portfolio or a, you know, a CLEP exam or something to help them kind of get that, you know, that next step towards, changing their major and concentrating on something else. So I just, that's more of a comment than a question. My actual question is more about structuring this. Is Would it be a good idea, I think it potentially would be a good idea, but I just want to see what everyone else thinks, is to have a time limit on this, in terms of maybe a semester or 2 semesters, because I think you do run into a problem with prerequisites for certain courses. Like a student can't move on in their degree if they, if they're trying to get credit for prior learning for the prerequisite for business 205 or something, and they need, business 110, and then this kind of drags out over a 2 semester period, that could really impede their academic progress. And, I mean, just from my experience with retention and things like that, the faster you get students through those entry level courses, the more likely they are to stay and persist in college. I'm thinking more of the bigger picture of, like, how do we talk about this with advisors, and how would an advisor kind of connect a student to this, but then make sure that the student actually fulfills it so they can move forward with their academic career.
Does anyone else have thoughts about that as a time limit? Or I can respond, but I want to leave space for discussion too. So I think that's a really good point.
Sorry,
Oh,
can I?
oh yes, go ahead, Michael.
Sorry, I was having a hard time getting off of mute and all
Hold on
that.
there.
So I think, the 4 credit model has an advantage of students have to sign up for it and pay for it. And I think they're more likely to really finish it then. If there's something that's lower cost or free or just a small fee or something like that, then I worry a lot of students are going to sign up for it and never really get through it all. It'll probably end up being more work than they figured. And so that's the only drawback I can really see to this. There are a lot of advantages, in it being centralized in particular. I think one concern we have at QCC is really how many students are going to want to do the portfolio process, and then what are we going to have to spend and set up, and just to manage a few students necessarily, right? I mean, it might take off and then it would be worth it, but there's no certainty to that, right? And so we just don't know what we're getting ourselves into. So at least having a centralized process would, I think, where we could, combine forces, then that would be great. I think that'd be the most cost-effective way to do it. Trying to build programs at every single college, right? Obviously, that's going to cost more. So those are my thoughts. I'm not saying I'm against her for it, but just what I'm thinking.
So, okay, thank you for those comments. And I think, that is, I think that in particular for colleges that haven't had, any or very few portfolio opportunities available at their campus, the hope would be that a centralized workshop would allow. You'll see from the questions that are on the screen now, that I'm thinking about it more from the departmental angle, which I'm hearing from this group we need to expand our thinking. So, but point being that, colleges could try it this way, and if they found that there was really an appetite for it, or they discovered that, this is actually content that should be available to students in their first year seminar, or, there's some like other way that that students should be given sort of the path to portfolio, then the college has used it for what it's useful for, and maybe takes some of it or uses it in certain departments, but it has a different approach in others. Like, I think we would want it to be flexible and serve the purpose for different colleges in different ways. And I've put some questions up here for consideration regarding sort of what are some of the ways that campuses would need, like some of the questions campuses would need to answer to make this work. And I would invite anybody to either chime in with other questions that are coming to mind for you. You can put them in the chat. You can come off mute, whatever makes sense. But just wanted to sort of give some space for just throwing questions that we can't necessarily answer right now, but that we should be collectively thinking about. Go ahead, Sydney.
I was just wondering, I also kind of had a question of whether or not students would be motivated to want to complete an uncredited workshop for a portfolio. Just because I'm realizing a lot of students who are looking for CPL, they want the incentive of something that will apply to their degree, whether or not they do submit a portfolio or not. And they want the aspect of movement in their degree. So I think when you're putting it as a uncredited option, sometimes they believe that that just means that it's just not as important, so to speak. So I think it's a question of thinking about how to incentivize a student to think that this is worth it for them and to think that the portfolio process would be worth it if they're just doing a workshop that's asynchronous in the aspect of like its own module. I'm finding, and I'm not sure if this is the truth for a lot of people, but I'm finding a lot more students want some sort of connection to a specific person instead of the I want to do it on my own. I'm finding that's the majority now instead of the minority of students who just want their own kind of like, I want to do it on my own. I don't need any help. I'm finding that a lot more students are coming and saying, I want the help. I want to come to somebody and say, explain the full process to me. So I just was wondering, and if this does get piloted and it gets moved forward, how would students really react to it?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think that for campuses where, and I think we know of a handful of campuses where, like I've said, there's like specific departments that are saying, yeah, we'll evaluate a portfolio. Here's our syllabus, and here's generally what we want you to do, and come back to us when your portfolio is done. I think that we're looking to sort of be that point of contact for the student about the process where the college or the department doesn't necessarily have the capacity or the expertise to do that, but with full recognition that it can't just happen in a vacuum of, you sign on to Brightspace and you walk through this and you come out with the perfect, but maybe you come out with something that's more informed than what you would have done on your own, or maybe you have a place to come for questions that is less of a back and forth with the college. I think there's some considerations um, there that we're like a gap that we're hoping to fill, but it's not necessarily the only gap that students would be experiencing with portfolio, and we recognize that. I'm going to see I see potential for linking with an academic internship course, particular students for already working in the field connected to their major require an internship course. Yes, I think that those are good thoughts. Does there need to be a more general workshop for potential students before they determine if they should? I think that Veronica question about, yeah, I had actually included a module 0, which I didn't put up here because I don't know exactly what it would look like, but yeah, exactly that. Because I think that, and that really varies by college and might need to be implemented at a college level, but a student should certainly be guided toward the easier get of a CPL opportunity if they're eligible for it. If there's an exam they could take, if there's an industry credential that they could obtain or that they already have, those credits should be available to them. They should not like upload that certification into their portfolio and then be like, you could have just gotten credit for that. You didn't have to go through all this. We would need that checkpoint to be built in before the student comes into the workshop for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's the type of thing where we would be we would be in a position to sort of help develop like a template for what that should look like at the colleges, but it's the college that is really in the best position to answer the question of like what that student is eligible for at that campus. What else is coming to mind for folks?
To me, is like a reoccurring theme of hearing like how important advisement is. All these things, workshops, talking to students, you have to meet with individual students. You have to assess where it would fit in a degree program. If it is a course in play, that is a prerequisite. If it's a course where all of those things and conversations have to happen ahead of time. So then when we're having the ask and departments are realizing of what do they want to do to assess for that particular course, that everyone's on the same page, same timeline. And then even sometimes we also provide guidance to faculty, say, like, remember, you can't give a final of a class where they haven't taken it. This is more general, like, just giving an example of a challenge examination, even the difference, like, this is what you're supposed to be assessing for someone who's coming in with general knowledge versus something that's specific to the course that they weren't exposed to, right? So even those things come up too with when we're talking to departments and just kind of providing that. We're saying not to do that, but just saying this is when, if we're talking about credit for prior learning, it has to be like this, right? We try to provide as much support to all stakeholders involved. And then and obviously looping in the advisor once there is a course that is being evaluated, to let them know, like, hey, I know you're doing advisement for the next semester. Just realize this course is in play in terms of evaluation. Please advise any other courses and we'll let you know the result, right? So everybody's aware and we know that.
Yeah. I mean, without a doubt, this workshop does not alleviate that much of the work that it would take to make portfolio successful on a campus. It would eliminate one piece of it and hopefully would infuse. And I think also, I'll go, we've given a little bit of thought to, which aspects of the portfolio process would be centralized versus campus specific, sort of like, outside of the workshop itself. I think what we envision is that we could sort of provide examples of how it's done elsewhere and connections at other institutions. We could provide professional development opportunities that are very targeted toward exactly what you're describing, Marcia, making sure that the people on any given campus that are going to opt into a workshop like this for any number of departments or, any small, whether it's one or two departments or the whole college, or a totally different approach, that we would make sure that we could help make sure that people have access to training. And we could also come up with, through this group, I think this is an intention throughout this year, but of really standardizing the type of criteria and templates that could be useful to campuses, like making sure that we're sort of putting in your hands some of the guidance and the standards that would hopefully help you answer some of these questions, even if the work itself really will have to be campus specific, but just making sure that you feel like you have a sense of what's, just access to information and guidance from our office that would hopefully help make the process a little bit more manageable for you all, but not to say it would eliminate the work. I also, the last, we have about 9 more minutes. I'm going to very quickly flip through a resource that we've developed that I think some of you have seen. I've shared it. I've shared it through the Teams group, and I think I've shared it directly with folks when they've been sort of grappling with, we want to do portfolio, we're kind of ready to do it, but we don't know exactly what we're doing. And I'm just going to flip through it quickly. And this is, it's available for anybody who wants to use it, but I think we also want to take the input from this group to try to improve it and change it in ways that would sort of address a lot of what we're talking about today. This is just a collection of materials that we've put together that would help an academic department think about making portfolio available to their students in their department. So not necessarily at a college level, some of the processes and infrastructure that Marcia was just talking about, but more for a department to say, yes, we want students to be able to do a portfolio with us. These are some checklists and different kinds of sort of things to be aware of or consider along the way regarding like what the department needs to do, what the student experience is likely to be, and what what the department would need to be thinking about from that perspective. We've put together some questions and guidance for thinking about what types of courses might make sense for portfolio if they want to identify particular courses for students to create portfolios for. We've also put together a template that could potentially be used by departments to create materials based on the syllabus that's a little more targeted to exactly what the department wants to see in the portfolio, so that there aren't really any surprises for students, that they really have it clearly laid out what they're looking for. We have some example rubrics, mostly borrowed from CALE, but I think we could also incorporate other kinds of rubrics and samples that exist from other institutions and from our own institutions here, all as examples of the kind of work that a department would need to put in order to be prepared to tell students, go take the workshop. This is available. You can do this. It will guide you toward creating a portfolio. Before any student would be sent in that direction, I think that these are some of the things we would want departments to be thinking about. And like I said, we're going to be sharing the deck, and I'm happy to share any other materials that you see here in more detail. And Christine would love to see portfolio. Yeah, I think that is a definite next step for us in our office to put together some sample redacted portfolios from different campuses to inform our thinking about this. I'm going to leave this screen up for a couple minutes and just see if anybody has any other questions or comments that you want to weigh in. This here, take a picture of it, or okay, Christine said that. Okay, so let me also throw in Angelica. I may not have actually sent you this one. Uh-oh, I'm going to make a big mess of this here. Whoops. Okay, here we go. I'm going to give you all, for those who are not in the mood to pull out their phone and take a screenshot of the QR code, I put the link here. This is just a feedback form that we're looking for. We are asking some specific questions about some of these topics that we have talked about today. We'll circulate this with the recording as well. But we just really want to make sure that we're giving a wide open call for input and feedback and ideas here. And I am going to pause and see if any wanted to kind of bring any last thoughts into today's discussion.
Alyssa, just where can I find it question. That portfolio assignment you just pulled up, you said it's on the Teams channel?
I had put it there a while back. I will circulate it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll circulate it with the follow-up materials from today's presentation.
Thanks.
And Angelica Rivera is our new Associate Director of Credit for Prior Learning. So you will all be getting to know her throughout all of our work, but she has been dropping into the chat some other links that are also up on screen here. We have one of our professional development sessions is taking place tomorrow. This is going to be focused on the data landscape report that we shared earlier this week, which is a new way to access and think about CUNY First data related to CPL to inform your own sort of strategic decision making and creating more equity in the CPL opportunities available across CUNY. Really would love to see lots of people there to learn more about that. I also sent out yesterday information about a half-day hands-on virtual workshop that we will be holding on Friday, December 5th. This is an opportunity really aimed at faculty to help them understand some very specific strategies for how to actually evaluate industry credentials and other forms of non-collegiate learning. We also have just recently launched in Brightspace, and we haven't formally rolled it out yet, but by virtue of coming here today, you get a first peek at our new PD course in Brightspace. I hope that you will take a time to look at it and share it with anybody on your campuses that you think may benefit from sort of an introductory briefing on CPL. And you will be seeing more about that soon. And our next portfolio working group session will be held Thursday, December 18th at noon. And we will, oh, can we ask Angelica to give a little background about herself? Angelica, not to put you on the spot, but would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Angelica Rivera, and as Alyssa said, I am the new Associate Director for Credit for Prior Learning. I have a background in higher education. I've worked in the field for the last 15 years. I was in Bronx Community College for about 10 years in a variety of roles, and most recently, over the last 5 years, I work in the nonprofit sector. I was a program director for a post-secondary support program working in college access and success in the Bronx. I'm also a recipient of CPL from SUNY Empire State for my master's in adult learning and higher education. So I am familiar with the process from a student perspective. But I am very happy to be here in this capacity and support the team and everybody in this meeting's work and in the different campuses and getting to know everybody better and learn your needs so we can best support you. So it was a pleasure to meet you all.
Thank you, Angelica. Yes, we're very excited to have Angelica on board and really looking forward to integrating her into all of the work that that we're all doing, and you know, just we're lucky to have her on board. Okay,
Welcome.
we are just about at time. Yes, yes, welcome. We're just about at time. Any final thoughts? Otherwise, everybody have a lovely afternoon. Have a great Thanksgiving. And we'll be in touch with the materials from today's session and those referenced in today's session by early next week. And hope to see many of you soon at some of our other upcoming professional development sessions. Thanks, everyone.